আমার কথা হবে রিল্যাক্স রেডিও বাংলায়, রিল্যাক্স রেডিও বাংলা।
রিল্যাক্স রেডিও বাংলা, সারাদিন সারাক্ষণ।
Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining me on Our Voice with Amina, where there's no stigma, no shame. Asha kori sob bhalo ason. I hope you are all well. So today our topic is a father's role in parenting. So amrar baba ba amrar fathers, for my English speaking friends, what role do they play in parenting? So um, আমরার বাবা হলে প্যারেন্টিং এর মাঝে বা আমরা যে আমরা লালন পালন করা লাইক থানতানোর রোল কিতা। সো আমরা কিছু টপিক আজকে টপিকও কিছু টাচ করবো যে আমরা যেগুলা বড় হইছি কিলা বড় হইছি ওভার টাইম একটা কিলা চেঞ্জ হইছে বিকজ when we were younger obviously আমরার situation are different আসিল, circumstances are different আসিল, and even the relationships আমরার যেটা আসিল, it was very different. So how has it evolved? Not just with our fathers, but the relationships around us, I suppose, because if the father's role is changing and the relationship is changing, it somewhat impacts the role that a mother plays too. So Khali Baba role change or Nama role change, and how has that evolved? So I come and look at some very special guest. Tan namoilo barrister Rizwan Hussain. After a show very familiar so in Tandeluya. Tanto onek show horoin tan nizoro show ase, but I'm very grateful he came on my show. He has also very recently become a father to his second child, so he's got quite a lot to say about fatherhood. But before we go and we speak to him, we're going to take a short introduction break. একটা intro break বাদে আমরা আবার ফিরিয়ে আয়ার ব্যারিস্টার রিজওয়ান হুসাইনের লগে মাতবার লগে।
সকাল দুপুর সন্ধ্যা রাতে তোমার আমার কথা হবে রিল্যাক্স রেডিও বাংলায়, রিল্যাক্স রেডিও বাংলা।
রিল্যাক্স রেডিও বাংলা, সারাদিন সারাক্ষণ।
Relax Radio Bangla, real frequencies.
Welcome back, viewers. So I have Barrister Rizwan Hussain today, a very familiar face who is supporting me with my discussions today on a father's role in parenting. Rizwan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Welcome back to my show. Walaikum salam. Thank you for supporting me again. I really appreciate you coming back and giving us some more time.
It's always a pleasure to be on your show. আজকে আসলে আমি একটু বাংলায় কথা বলি। জানো কেন? বাইরে এত গরম, আমার কাছে লাগতেছে যে আজকে আমি বাংলাদেশে বসে আছি।
Oh, it is unbelievable. But you're sitting in aircon, I believe, so I don't know what you're complaining about.
আচ্ছা, তাহলে বাংলায় হচ্ছে না।
No, we can do a hybrid show. So how are you? How's things? How's I heard you're well, you're not a new father, but you have become a father to your second child who's only been born in the last few weeks.
Yes, alhamdulillah. He's 22 days in about half an hour. So, so
you remember the time.
Yes, he becomes 22 days. So my first son is turning 2 this month, and his name is Zain, and we call my new son, his name is Dee. So Zain and Dee.
Very
Two
nice.
very simple names. Yeah.
When you said 22, I was like, is he going to say 22 years? Because that can't be right. But in 22 years, we could be doing a show like this, and you're like, oh, in half an hour, he's going to be 22.
That's entirely possible. It's interesting you asked that question to start off with, because one of the first duties of the father is to give the child a good name. Yeah?
Absolutely.
That duty falls on the father to give them a good name. So when it came to naming him, I thought, nowadays, like, there's so many beautiful Muslim names, but when they get to school, that name becomes something else altogether. So I've always looked for names that can't be changed.
I see.
So because pronouncing some of the Muslim names can become really tough.
And we've
in
had
school.
that as we
So
were growing up. You heard so many names being pronounced all wrong, and it is still being pronounced wrong. But if you keep simple, easy kind of names, is no one can change it.
I'll give you one example. Some years ago, I was going to be interviewed by a university student. So the student union called me and they said, "Oh, Miss Mannon will be giving you a call." I said, "Wow, Miss Mannon? Okay."
Mhm.
I couldn't figure out what the name was. Of course, later I found out this was Miss something Abdul Mannan. Yeah. So, yeah. So I eventually met the Miss Mannon in the end. So that was a stark reminder. Name your children in a way where they can actually function properly, being recognized by the right name in this country. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's not just our country, but if we look at English is obviously the most common language around the world. So if you're traveling, you also want to be referred to by your actual name.
I've seen that happen so many times. I've traveled the world, and sometimes some names are so difficult. They're announcing them repeatedly in the airport. They're missing their flight. But unfortunately, they're hearing the announcement, but they don't recognize
They
their
don't
name.
recognize their own name. Oh
So,
God,
yeah.
yeah. Right. So, how is parenting for you then? What's your take on parenting
Alhamdulillah,
at the moment?
I think now is probably the best time for me to have done this program because I've had 2 years of experience with Zain from the point that he was born. He's now a very hyper toddler. And now, of course, the next one's come along. And this time the experience was completely different because you've experienced all those things the last two
You've had
years.
a
You know what
practice
to
run.
expect. Because I remember when I brought Zayn home, this is my first son, I didn't know where to put him to start off with. I said, oh my God,
Oh.
where do I put him? So I called my mum and said, Mum, where shall I put him? She said, well, put him in the cot. I said, well, what if the cat jumps in the cot? Well, watch over him. So, it was it was a very strange one. I think even my son thought, what on earth is he up to? But yeah, you
This is a
learn things as you
strange
go.
place, and that's a strange man looking back at me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Who doesn't have a clue. Oh, but at least you've had a practice run now, so you're obviously a lot
Mm.
more confident, and I suppose over time as well, it is a learning curve, and we're constantly learning as parents as well. I mean, nobody gives us a manual and says, "Here you go, here's a manual on parenting, and this is how you do it." And obviously, it's different for different people and different children, so a manual wouldn't work as such.
Yeah,
So,
no two babies are ever the same. I think this one is completely, every day I notice something different. This one's less noisier, less irritated, sleeps a lot more, and is a lot calmer. So it's a welcome uh, bit of change for us. Yeah.
oh, that's great. So, if we're looking at modern outlook of parenting, so we're at the current day and time around us, and how things have changed from back then and now, what's your experiences of you know a, a father? Obviously, you don't have experience being a father back in the days, but your dad and the relationship that you had with your dad, and the relationship that you foresee having with your children.
I think in many ways, it's such a contrast to perhaps how our own fathers were. I remember a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, who spoke to me before my first son was born, and he said to me, he felt quite sad that his son wasn't connected to him. There wasn't a bond. His son's about 10 or 11 years old.
Right.
And, I asked him, so why do you think there isn't a bond between you and your son? It's because I didn't really get involved, like changing nappies and feeding him milk and all of that stuff.
Oh wow.
I left that to my wife. And as the years went by, his kind of go-to person became his mum. As a father, he was a go-to person. And I'm so grateful that he said that to me before my Zayn was born, because I did quite the opposite. And it might come as a surprise to many, even to my friends now, they're a bit surprised when I say, I have probably, um, and again, no lie, you're free to call my wife and ask her. I've changed about 99% of his nappies since he was born.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
And I take great pleasure in doing that because I read somewhere that that simple act creates a very strong bond between father and child, and I've witnessed that because now I'm the go-to person out of the two of us. So if he wakes up in the middle of the night, then he'll look for me. Um,
Oh.
so, and the second thing is that to prepare food for the children. So when my first son, when Zayn started having solids, I started cooking for him. So
Oh, nice.
the first thing I cooked was a good traditional Bengali dal, yeah, with
Okay.
some rice, and
Nice.
that's now his favorite food. His second favorite is kurma with rice.
I've
Yeah,
seen some of your korma pictures. They're nice, amazing.
so so the two things have happened in the last 2 years. One is I've become the go-to person, and second is that I take great pleasure in saying that my son actually prefers my cooking. Not to say that he doesn't like his mum's; he likes his mum's cooking.
Cover your back.
But to be able to, yeah, but to be able to say that is something big. Um,
Absolutely.
and I remember my earliest memories when my two younger sisters were born, and perhaps once in a while I think my father did change a nappy or two, or go and make the milk. But uh, it was quite a different kind of dynamic then altogether. And I think nowadays, I think being a more hands-on father is uh, hopefully becoming more common. I'm
Mm,
not sure about everyone else, but I think there's a great benefit in that. And sometimes, as fathers, people try to develop a relationship a few years down the line, and you've actually missed out on a lot of
mm,
things in those very initial years. Where, if for example, my son is waking up in the middle of the night running to me for comforting, then I hope he will do the same thing when he's a 10-year-old or when he's a 15-year-old.
right. Yes.
You see, because if you're the go-to person, that doesn't change as they get older. It
Mm,
continues. So
definitely.
that's been my experience, and I'm trying to repeat the same with the new one. Although I have a few major barriers now, the the elder one won't allow it.
That's
So,
what I was just coming to.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So he still is the king of the house, and he's like, "Who are you? Why are you taking my
he
space?"
is. He is. I didn't ever realize how much jealousy could exist in a 2-year-old. Subhanallah. But yeah, it's quite cute to watch as well.
Oh, that's so cute. Right. Oh, they must be they I mean, obviously the little one doesn't understand it yet, but um
Mm.
the 2-year-old is probably going through so many, emotions and so much stress just to like, who is this little being and why is he here and why is he getting all the attention or some of what the attention used to be mine. But it's hard for them as well because obviously they're not at that
Yeah,
stage
and,
where they
and
understand
and
it
what I did, I actually read up about that as well, how you actually deal with that, because you're dealing with a child's first kind of strong emotions. Yeah,
yet. Mm,
it's the first time he's feeling like, okay, am I going to be loved less, or
yes.
why is my dad picking up another baby? Was my mom picking up another baby? So again, I was reading up on this. There are certain things that you have to do. And what came to my mind is, well, this is it. From that age, you're dealing with their emotional turmoil as well. And if you're able to master that at that age, you will be able to deal with that hopefully the rest of their life. Because
Mm,
parenting isn't just about buying them clothes or putting food on the table. It's about dealing with everything that they go through, everything that we went through as teenagers.
mm.
We went through that rebellious period. We went through that period. Sadly, at some point, we've all said to our parents, "It's my life." Yeah, and
I can do whatever I want.
yeah, I can do whatever. I'm old enough to do whatever I want. You know, and now I think about that. It makes me feel so bad that even if once in my life I actually said that, I need to retract that, because no, it's not as simple as that. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it.
There is, and I suppose you only appreciate that when you become a parent yourself, that how tough it is and how hard it is, that, those sleepless nights, those, whether you're well or not, you still got to continue being a parent. You can't switch it on and off. And, sometimes you might just want to go out when you want to go out, but you can't because you're thinking about these little beings, or even when they're sick, the amount of work that goes into, making sure that they're okay, is so much to ask for. Like even if we have 1 hour's less sleep, we get so groggy and we're like, oh, we're so tired. And day in, day out with newborns, it's a constant thing for the
Yeah,
first.
I can happily say that in the last 2 years, I haven't had a straight 8 hours sleep yet. So I think those days have gone. I know they say things get better, but coming back to the point that I was making, that obviously the dynamics have changed in terms of parenting. Now I think we're a bit more conscious about um, being emotionally connected with our children, uh, being the person that they can turn to uh, at all times. Because I've seen it quite a lot as I was growing up. A lot of my friends have children, and there comes a stage where they suddenly say, you know what, I want to bond with my son. The son is 10, 12 years old.
Yeah.
12 years have gone by, and now you suddenly want to bond with your child. It's not going to happen overnight. It's
Mm.
something I think must happen from the beginning. You see, there's something very interesting. The Islamic concept of parenting, or
Hmm.
rather fatherhood, is said in one sentence. In Surah An-Nisa in the Quran, it says that, addressing men, so to speak, you are leaders and you will be responsible for those who you lead.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
So, as a father, if you're the leader of your children, you're going to be held responsible for how you actually lead them and what you lead them to.
Right. I see.
So that's quite deep, because
That is.
it means that there'll come a time where anything that's gone wrong, you are partly, if not fully, responsible for that.
Responsible. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So
actually, if that's looking at Islamic perspective, but even if we look at like the current modern society or literature or psychology as such as well, it is that a father plays such a critical role in a child's development and the way a child is brought up and who he becomes. So, in that sense, do you see any like your 2-year-old picking up any of your traits at the moment where he's like trying to be you, because they apparently like reflect and what they see, what they hear is what they start becoming. So has he picked up any of
yeah,
that yet?
it's very true, because you've got to remember, for your children, you have to be the superhero.
Mm,
Yeah, you've got to
mm,
be the first superhero. It can't be a character on TV. It can't be somebody else who's not in your
yeah.
family. And
Do you
the
have
thing
your own
is, we've
costume?
all. I do, in fact. I have pictures of being in a Spider-Man costume. If only we could share these pictures. It's hilarious, because I'm actually doing my salah in a
In a
Spider-Man costume.
Spider-Man's costume.
Yeah. So anyway, that's another topic for another day. But yeah, if we are not the first superheroes of our children, then what do they emulate? What do they want to be? So, so let's rewind back. When I was growing up, was my father my superhero? In many ways, yes.
Right.
In many ways, he represented something that I wanted to be. A couple of
Oh.
very important things that I picked up from him, um, and it may sound insignificant to some people, but
Hmm.
one is to walk upright and dress well. Yeah,
Okay.
I always saw that in my father. He was an army man, so his back was always straight, and he always used to say to me, "Why do you guys walk as if your head's just about to fall off?" So that's one thing I got from him, to be upright, to walk with. He used to say, "Walk with dignity." That's the first thing. Second thing is that I picked up from my father. He was very meticulous when it came to cleanliness of clothes and person. You know, so in those aspects, he was my superhero. But as you know, look, people of my generation, and perhaps even some people of your generation,
Hmm.
there wasn't the relationship of best friends with my father. It was a different dynamic at that time.
And we kind of
We
touched on
grew up.
this when we were having a chat,
Yeah,
of the relationship and the equation that we had in mind when we were growing up, and how that equation has changed when we come to parenting ourselves. So,
yeah, absolutely. Look, fair enough. We didn't experience going out every Sunday to go and play football with my father. I mean, they were working people. They were
yeah.
busy putting food on the table. quite difficult and harsh times in
times.
the 70s and 80s. But I'm sure current generation, I'm looking forward to the day I can go to the movies with my son. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
watch the latest children's movie that's out. But these are different times than then.
Yeah.
However, they still did, their best in every way.
Absolutely. And, we were talking about how they had so many, responsibilities. Like, when they did come in the 70s, 80s, they were looking after their parents back home. They were looking after the brothers, the sisters, the extended relatives or poor relatives as such. And then they also had a family here. So they had a huge burden and a huge responsibility because obviously people from Bangladesh don't understand how one earns money here or the effort that goes into it. Um, but now, when we look at ourselves and the dynamics now, it is just us and our families as such, because we are fortunate to have our siblings and our parents and everyone to have their own money, so their burden isn't really on us.
I mean, to be honest, your parents, my parents, those people of that generation, they were somewhat superhuman, and I'll tell you why they were superhuman. With just two little ones at home, I feel like my life's been overtaken. Yeah, I struggle to do things. I struggle to sit at my desk and work, and when I
Yeah.
go out, I'm thinking I need to be back by a certain time. But they did everything. Yeah,
Everything.
and not
They
with
didn't
just
even
one or
have
two.
support, some of them, like
Our
they didn't
families,
have family here.
yeah, our families were big, 5 kids. Yeah, mum and
Yep.
dad both working. Yeah,
Hmm.
and they're cooking for us,
Mm.
and their cooking wasn't here's a pasta, enjoy yourself. It was 2, 3 curries and rice,
A
and it was
feast.
done nearly every second day. There was no just eat or let's order a takeaway in or let's take you to the chicken shop. There's none of that. Yeah,
Mm.
um, there wasn't that opportunity to say, here, let me put on YouTube for you, entertain yourself for 2 hours while I get on with something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
None of that, and they still managed, and they
Yeah,
did an amazing job.
they
That's
did.
why I say people of our parents' age they were superhuman compared to us.
Mm.
We,
Mm.
we struggle. We struggle
Yeah,
with
we have
everyday things.
technology, we have all these facilities, like you said, the takeaways, even when it comes to work, a lot of us, we can work from home and still look after our children. Whereas back in the days, it could have been that they're in a restaurant, in a factory,
Hmm.
it could a physical job where you had to be in your place of work. But things have changed so much now, and even so, we still struggle with time. We still struggle with energy. Even, I know, some of my dad, like my dad, my uncles, and some of his friends, they all had like 3 4 jobs,
Yeah.
and they were constantly like working around the clock and just about surviving off a few hours of sleep.
Well, I mean, just to recall my own family dynamics, my mother, she worked from home, and I think this hundreds of thousands of families in the UK can relate to this. There used to be an industrial sewing machine at home because we
We
used to
still
wake
got
up to the
ours.
hum of that sewing machine. She would get up at 7 o'clock and
Yeah.
we could hear the humming of that sewing machine. And then she would stop, she would make our breakfast, get us ready for school, send us off to school. Then she'll continue doing that, take a break, cook during lunchtime,
Mm,
and then, if necessary, walk to the school, pick us up, come back, and continue that sewing work till
yeah.
well after we'd gone to sleep.
Sleep.
And yet they managed, you know. There was yeah, so we struggle a bit, but I think the important thing to understand is that at that time they may have had less technology to help them, but the thing is, I think technology has made us a bit weak. We,
Mm, mm.
how many parents are waking up in the morning, taking their child into the living room, switching on the TV and YouTube, and saying, "There you are." Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that wasn't the case with us
No, it
at all.
wasn't. And it's funny because, like, even with technology now, and all these advancements in science, like, we still don't know what our children are up to. But back in the days, if we're going back to when we were kids, gosh, there was no
Mm.
CCTV, there was no phones, there was nothing, but everybody knew what everyone's children were doing. Like, oh, I saw your child here, and it's just like, how is that happening? Whereas now, people,
That was a very connected spy network that we learn about later on in life. Everybody was connected with everybody. They didn't even have mobile phones or the ability to take a picture and send it to somebody. But before we got home, the news got home.
the news got home. Exactly. And this is what I
Yeah.
mean. And sometimes our children are sitting right next to us on their devices or whatever, and you still don't know what they're doing, you know? So it was amazing. I mean, obviously times have changed now. But if we kind of go on to like our relationships with our fathers as such, so for back in the days, and it's not that we're, you know, gunning them down for everything, because everyone did the best that they could, but
Yeah.
what's the change now? Because obviously when I look at like the relationship with my dad, or you know, our uncles and you know, our cousins, the relationship, it was pretty much like based on fear and respect, right? Whereas
Mm.
now I think that children in this day and age, they're not really they don't really fear their parents, but I think it's more like a friendship, and it's more so that we're sort of on their level and we're trying to understand it from their perspective. Whereas when we were kids, it was more like we're trying to understand the parents' perspective, and it is their
Mm.
perspective only. And I suppose that has, in your case as well, as a parent, that would have changed for you too, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest change is that, look, again, I don't want to put down even the slightest bit how well our parents did. Theirs
Yeah,
was a different time. Theirs was a
absolutely.
different method. You're right. The relationship with my father, we feared him, we
Mm.
respected him, and we loved him. It was in that order, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I think things are a little bit different, and the way I would like it with my children is to have a relationship of love, respect, and then fear. But turning it around completely, because um, I think about it now. Of course, look, like I said, our parents, they had their own way. Remember, they learned from their parents, and that was a completely different
Mm.
dynamic. If you think about what they learned from was your grandparents and your father. You probably
Yeah.
couldn't even imagine what that relationship was like.
No,
Yeah.
apparently, you know,
So
when I ask about what the relationship used to be like with the grandparents, some people have said, "Oh, they didn't even know how old we were."
yeah, and that's probably quite accurate, because even over a period of time, I think fathers were quite disconnected
Yeah.
with the upbringing of children, and especially in Bangladesh. One of the things that used to happen in Bangladesh was this communal upbringing that used
Mm.
to happen. So you'd have very large extended families. You'd have your wife's relatives, your brother, maybe your sister-in-law, etc. And children were brought up communally.
Together,
So
isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
the
remember like
father's
having a
involvement.
plate of rice and lots of it mixed together, and then all five, six of you lined up, and then someone just feeding you as they go along, like, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. So and I had a bit of that when I visited Bangladesh for extended periods in Bangladesh, where even our uncles didn't differentiate between their children and our
Yeah.
children. So it was a very different dynamic then. But I think now more than anything else, it's important, because we can look back and say, well, if our parents had done this differently, it would have been different. You can't really
Mm.
say that, because
No,
theirs
you can't,
was
'cause that
their
time that
their
was
time.
correct. The
But
way.
in today's time, I think the most important thing is to be able to be, remember I said at the beginning, to be the go-to person for your
Yeah.
children. If your children are going to other people outside your family, or friends, to confide in them, to tell them their problems, they're not going to get the best advice possible. So I think for me, most important is to offer that friendship that they can't get anywhere else. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think with my father, it's difficult to say that we were friends. He was my
Mm.
father. He was a
Yes.
respected figure. He was a feared figure.
Mm.
So in those days, if I was to turn around and say to my father in a public domain, "Dad, I want you to be my friend," that would have been looked down upon. Yeah, yeah. Some of the nosy neighbors and uncles would have said, "দেখো বাচ্চার অবস্থাটা বাবার সঙ্গে সে বন্ধুত্ব করতে চায়."
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, of course.
So um, So that would have been looked down very different.
I
But
mean,
I
the
think
the
in
respect
today's
and the
time,
fear was so strong. I think it's like I remember, like when we'd misbehave, like as siblings, like all my mum had to say was, "Wait till your dad gets home," and we'd be absolutely like so scared. We'd be like, "Oh my god, when dad comes home, God knows what's gonna happen." And she wouldn't say anything to him, but that's all she had to say to calm us down, right? Whereas now, these days, as soon as maybe the dad's walked in through the door, the kids are saying everything that's happened. Mommy said this, mommy did that, and and they're letting it all out. They don't have
yeah, I
that. You
think
can't even look
I sometimes look back at that and laugh how one was pitted against the other. So the mothers would say, "Make sure you tidy up before your dad comes in." Yeah,
yeah,
dad was probably the least scariest person out of the two. We probably feared our mum more
more.
because with my mum it was the look.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just that
that one look was enough to silence you and put you out in the cold. That
yeah,
was it. Yeah.
even when
But
we were out.
they did used to pit one against each other.
Yeah,
If
they
your
would.
mum finds out, or if your dad finds out. So I think in modern psychology, they actually advise against that. That don't pit one against the other. Don't say,
Oh, okay.
you know, I'm not going to do anything, but if your dad finds out, then there's going to be problems because that's actually advised against because you're
That
effectively
explains a lot of my
making
damage, but hey ho.
yeah. So it's kind of good cop, bad cop kind of playing
Yeah,
with kids. So, but that's what it was back then, and I have no regrets in the way they brought us up.
yeah, but it
But
worked.
can you imagine though if we were able to establish a friendship with our fathers back then? How would that have impacted our lives as to who we are today? That's kind of unimaginable. And I think, especially in my case, wow, if I was able to be my dad's friend and he was my best friend, I
Mm.
think a lot of things in life would have turned out different.
Different. And I suppose now looking back, what we appreciate, and me and my siblings, we always look back on is, when dad would play like carom board with us or like Monopoly and things like that. And that was that little time that we had, where he was your friend and on your level, and we'd be fighting over certain things like, no, that's cheating, that's this, that's that. But funnily enough, even through those games, he'd be like, I'm the dad, I decided, I won, so you will lose. And it's like, what? How does that
Yeah.
happen? So
Well, I mean, dads back in the days had the last word. Yeah.
exactly.
They had the last word. And what one thing that you know, later on in life you come to understand is that for you and me, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me 100%, to us, our parents could never make a mistake.
No,
Yeah.
that's so
I
true.
think to this day, my father's passed away, it's
Mm.
15 years ago now. But even to me now, it's like our parents can never make a mistake. Yeah.
No,
And,
no.
and, and therefore, the concept of our parents apologizing to us for a mistake was, you know, what are you talking about? That's
No, that would
impossible.
never happen. That would never happen.
So, whereas now, in bringing up my kids, if I make one little mistake in doing something, I will quickly apologize to myself. So I'm so sorry, Baba. Yeah. And
Yeah,
then it occurs to me, gosh, I never heard that when I
yeah.
was growing up.
My
Yeah.
little one, what he will say is, "Oh, you did this wrong. You need to apologize." God, could I imagine myself ever saying that to my dad? Well, I'll be like, "You're right." Even if I know he's wrong, forget an apology. For me to even say that, I wouldn't even dream of it. But these days, kids, they're being brought up in a different way, and it's not wrong. I don't think it's wrong because if a child thinks you're wrong and they are pointing out that you're wrong, there's nothing wrong in apologizing. And
I,
sometimes,
and I, I think that's what's important. Remember, we said friendship, and I want my own children to see at some point that yeah, look, your dad's not perfect. Yeah,
mm,
he can also make mistakes, and you're right to point them out. I don't think if we ever back then pointed out that our dad was doing something wrong, wow, we'd need a bit of a hiding back
yep,
then to get
yeah,
through that one. Yeah.
خلّينا نتهلل معلش خرياw. Just to make you a
So,
slight bit, slippery.
do you know what was useful when a situation akin to something like that happened? Was to get out the parker and put it on no matter what the weather was. Yeah? Do you know the parker coat was the biggest defense mechanism when you went to a mosque. Yeah,
Yeah,
because in the mosque we'd get the occasional
yeah,
beating. Yeah,
yeah.
so we were young, but we all figured it out. Dad, I need a parka. And he says, it's summertime. When do you need a parka? Nope, need it. Yeah. To go to the mosque in that parka, you sit in that, you can be as cheeky as you want. Because they can't hit on your hands, they can't hit on your face. Go for it. And
Oh my
that's how it was. So the parka was the defense mechanism. Wow.
God, that's a blast from the past, isn't it? Parker coats.
Yeah. So anyway, coming back to the point that I was making, two things I think are very important with my children. One is to establish that perhaps, look, I probably won't be their best friend. They'll have a best friend at some point, but
Yeah.
I want to be the friend that they feel confident in being able to speak
And they
to,
can trust
even
that.
when you make a mistake.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
and to tell them that it's okay to make a mistake, because I think I grew up thinking it wasn't okay to make a mistake.
No.
Do you know how dangerous that thought is? That because if you make a mistake, you will never ever share that with your
I was
parents.
talking to a friend, and we were talking about how when children would go to school, and we're talking back in the days, and they might get into a little a little ruffle here and there, or a little fight or an argument or something, and no matter how right you were, it didn't matter. Why did you get into that? You were wrong to get into that. So even if you were defending yourself and you had to run away from a situation, it was like, why have you found yourself in that situation? It shouldn't have even come to it.
Absolutely. You know what? I recall that I had a friend at school. He got into a fight, yeah, and he was entirely the innocent side. He didn't make this fight happen. Unfortunately, the other guy picked on him. Ended up he had to defend himself. When he got home, he got another beating because he got into a fight at school.
Yeah, and you
So
think,
that, and I think that's because there was that lack of friendship, that lack of
and a lot of
openness.
times I did see him back in the days when the boys did get into a fight or whatever, they wouldn't come home and say, because they'd be like, you know what,
No,
there's no point, because I'm going to get into it and I'm going to get another hiding at home. So forget it. There's no point.
so that friendship plays a very very important role. I think one of the biggest concerns that, and I ran a campaign on that some years ago, was about children being bullied at school.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that continues for a long time is that barrier in that relationship with the parents, where they won't tell their parents about the bullying at school. A, because their father or mother might turn around and say to them, "Well, can't you stand up for yourself?" Yeah,
Right.
that embarrassment. And number two is having that trust that your parents can deal with it without putting you in a further difficult situation.
Mm.
Yeah. So friendship is so important with our children, because otherwise you'll never find out certain things that happen in your kid's life that
And whether they're
stay
safe
with
as
them for
well.
life. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also about, safeguarding. It's about, in this day and age, things are so available at fingertips, whether it
Mm.
is in a school, whether it is through technology, you have to be in that loop, and they have to be happy and confident to have those conversations without being judged. And I think that's the main thing, is that judgment that holds them back. Like if they feel like they're not being judged, they're happy to say whatever they want. They can be open and honest, and they don't have to beat around the bush to try and say something.
Well, you've touched on an important word there. That dialogue between the child and their parents. I don't remember us having many casual dialogues when we were younger. You know, that a lot of parents, even to when they're driving their child home from school. I mean, you got to remember, school runs is a new thing, because back in the day, school runs mean we ran to school.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was. Nobody had cars back then. Had the luxury of kind of being dropped in the car and picked up in the car. But you take advantage of that. That's the time where you have that conversation
Yeah.
with your child and say, find out what happens to them. And I think the only time, I think, and again, I don't blame them for it, that was their way of doing things, but they made up in many other different ways, was when the school report came. And well, we were lucky as kids. We all had amazing school reports. In fact, we've still got them. Yeah, my
Oh,
mum still has the original handwritten school reports to
wow.
this day, 40, 50 years
It's
on.
not sitting at the London Museum or something, is it?
It will be at some point. became old
Become
enough.
antique.
Yeah, but that was the time when they would take and our parents, even though they had difficulty understanding the language, they would go. They would never miss a parents' evening. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
that's actually so important, and I do remember that as being a really fond memory of my childhood, like because they used to start parents' evening at like 6 o'clock in the evening, so you'd actually go home, you'd eat, get changed, and then you'd go back to the school. And even though they had that language barrier, they were still trying so hard to find out what is it that the child does. And it's funny because I remember my dad would be like, I don't care what's on there, as long as it's all A stars, I don't care. Like we're not that
yeah,
clever though.
and the thing is, these play a very important part. So they got a lot of things right. They went to parents' evenings. They went to when we had a special concert put on. They were there in the audience.
Sports
You know,
days. I
the
just remember
sports
them being
days.
there
You
for sports
know,
days. Yeah.
they were there. They were there making us so sad,
These
kind of
days, a lot of parents
sandwich
can't go
boxes
to
for.
these things because they're working or they got work commitments. Because sports days usually happen during the day, so unless they take time off or they might have other siblings that they, and these days, let's be honest, if you do have a childminder, you're not going to leave your child with a childminder to go and watch a sports day because it is the cost element, it is the logistics of it is also sometimes quite difficult. Whereas, because our parents were working from home or they could find a way to get there. I remember like my parents being at all the sports days and
Hmm,
concerts. We used to go to a Christian school, so there used to be like nativities and
absolutely,
stuff, and we used to be
yeah.
like Mary and Jesus and
The,
stuff. We were fine with it.
well, the number of times I was the sheep in the nativity
Were you the
programs.
black sheep?
I think I was traumatized because I never got to be Jesus. You know, I don't think it would
Oh,
have
that's
made
so
sense me
sad.
being Mary in any case, or Joseph for that matter. I was never one of the three wise men, but I was the sheep. I think 2, 3 years in a row.
It makes sense though. I see it. You've got
Maybe
potential.
they were trying to pull the wool over my eyes. That's a really bad thing. But
Yeah,
yeah.
something like
So
that. Right. We were talking about parenting classes and how it's really important to take parenting classes. But if somebody was to suggest to somebody, oh, you should take a parenting class, and they become defensive as such, like, what are you saying, that I'm not a good father or a good mother or a parent? Um, do you think it's really important to take parenting classes, and why?
um, I mean, that's one thing that I'm very much advocating now. As you know, I'm involved in a TV channel, and one of the programs that we're now broadcasting is about parenting,
Okay.
and there's a
Is it general
surprising
parenting
uptick.
or is it parenting from an Islamic point of view?
It's quite generic. It's quite
Okay.
generic in terms of parenting. The person who runs the show, Dr. Abdul Bari, is qualified in that area as an educator. Um, so his PhD was in education and children's studies, etc. So it's quite generic in that sense. Now, if somebody was to 5 years ago, if somebody said to me, you know what, parenting classes, even I had that mindset. What do I need to learn to be a dad? Yeah.
Usually,
Do I need to learn to
parenting
be a mom?
classes are for alcoholics or drug addicts or things like that. That's what you associate parenting
Yeah. I
classes for.
mean, I used to associate it with those people who got caught by social services. That these,
Services, exactly. Yeah.
but the reality is now that I seriously look into it, look, none of us are born experts. Yeah, at parenting, none of us as before our own children, we've not been parents before. Yeah, and the question is this: as if you have the opportunity to learn more about parenting and implement that with your children and get better results, would you rather take that option or go into it blindly and continue to make these mistakes, which have a long lasting effect on your children? Yeah?
Absolutely.
Would you not prepare before you went to an interview? Yeah.
Yeah.
So why would you not prepare when you're going into parenting, which is a lifelong commitment?
And it's a
So
lifelong learning curve as well. There's no like, oh, I've just
absolutely,
done it up to here and that's it, I'm done. There's constantly things are changing around us, like even if we're looking at school, technology, science, all of that. And with that, I suppose we also have to keep up as parents. Like there is no like, oh, our parents did it this way and we continue that, because obviously we have to move with time as well. It was right what they did in their time, it is right what we're doing in our time, and maybe when our children are parents, they will do what is right for their time. But we as
I
parents
mean,
have to
you know,
up.
for a lot of people, attending classes might be a bit extreme for them. Oh, well, look, I ain't got time to go to parenting classes. But there's lots of books that they can read. There's lots of everything's available on YouTube. There's lots of
There's
videos that
books,
you can
there's
watch.
YouTube, the internet,
And
there's so many
my
things.
mindset was, what can they possibly teach me about being a father to my sons? Yeah, I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised. Little things, even how you respond to a child's anger, even how you respond to a child being upset, or how you even remove a toy from a child's hand. Believe it or not, these
Wow.
things have a psychological effect on children. And what's really sad, through the process of doing these programs on the TV channel, we realize a lot of people are ringing up whose children are now teenagers, and they've got into that kind of deep water situation, or
Right.
something quite horrendous has happened to their teenage son or daughter, and now they're interested in learning. Well, that's very late down the line. Yeah, you
So
can't
it should
fall
be
into a
prevention
crisis.
before
Yeah,
cure.
prevention. Yeah, so
Mm.
because you can't fall into a crisis and then suddenly decide I'm going to watch a few programs on parenting and make it right. I think we all have that opportunity, because in the order of things, and I'm going to say it as black and white as possible, in our own lives, we put importance on things like earning at number one. I need to earn money. Yeah. Number two, I need to have all the luxuries in my life and my house and my car, etc. Number three, I need to be a good parent. Yeah. Some people may not agree, but unfortunately,
Mhm.
sometimes we prioritize our earning over being a good parent.
Mhm.
Sometimes we prioritize our own comforts before understanding what the child is needing
Right.
psychologically. And I
Mm.
think in this modern age, it's so easy. You don't have to feel embarrassed about going to class. If you do, don't go to a class. Watch YouTube videos. There are some
Mhm.
amazing books that have been written by Muslims and non-Muslims on parenting that if you pick up, I was reading one only last week. I think it's called Baby Whisperer. Yeah,
Okay.
amazing book. It's about how you actually start to communicate with a newborn from day one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
because a lot of us think, well, all they do is sleep and eat at this stage. But no, there
Yeah.
are actually means of communicating with them through touch, through sound, through comforting. Um, and the thing is, I would urge people who already have younger children, who are planning to have children, it's not going to be something you're going to, it's not a 2 year course, it's not a 5 year course. It may take at best 5, 6 hours of your time. But once you've gone through that process, you will be grateful for having learned that, because how we deal with our children completely shapes their future. And I could come back to what I said at the beginning. Allah Himself says in the Quran, Surah Nisa, you are the leaders and you will
Mhm.
be responsible for how you lead and
Mhm.
those that you lead. Yeah.
Right.
So if your children are turning up with certain difficulties or facing certain issues, you need to track your steps back and say, hang on. And what's the most common thing that a father says? Why didn't you ever tell me about this?
Yeah.
Well, you
Yeah.
need to
But
ask
once
yourself,
it's
well,
done,
why
it's
did my,
yeah.
yeah, why did, well, you need to ask yourself, why didn't your son order to tell you about this? Why do
Mm.
you think? Have you
Mm.
ever had
Mm.
that conversation? Yeah.
Mm.
So very, very important. And I would promote that very much. I want to go on to one more thing.
Yeah.
Sorry
Go
if I
for it.
keep going on and
No.
on.
No.
And that is, as much as with modern technology, we've got access to a lot of things to learn about parenting, this
Yeah.
modern technology is also very, very dangerous for us.
No. Yeah.
Sometimes what we're doing, um, we've got to remember what's the first things that a child learns? He learns from hearing you and watching you. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the things that you say, the child will repeat. So if you use bad language, the child will learn that bad language. If you shout at people, the child will think it's good to shout at people to be heard. Yeah. But at the same time, if you're sitting there in front of your child on your device for hours and hours, you're teaching your child that it's okay to be on your device for hours and hours. And unfortunately, that is what's happening with a lot of the children. As soon as they know how to swipe
Yeah.
left and right, you're giving them a device, and that's
Hmm.
becoming their first teacher. And that is the most dangerous thing, unless it's controlled.
And this
And
is a really,
I was
yeah.
reading recently that some children have, on average, 6 to 8 hours screen time from the age of 2. Now, whether that's TV screen or iPad screen, 6 to 8 hours screen time
Oh my God.
daily.
That's why
Now,
you
imagine
see
how
young
dangerous that
kids
is.
with glasses, like 2, 3-year-olds with glasses. And then also when they come into school, so when we see children coming into school, they're coming in with like speech delays. They're coming in with sort of symptoms or signs of global delay, but actually they don't have global delay. It is just that because they've been so stuck in this world, they don't know how to socialize, they don't know how to communicate, they don't know
Hmm.
how to, be around other people or other children, so their response to that is just screaming and shouting. So all these kids are being assessed for diagnoses or things like disabilities, but actually a few years down the line, and we've been following this, a few years down the line, it becomes that they don't have any issues, they don't have any disabilities. It was just that the environment that they were in has caused this.
I mean,
It's so sad.
do you know what it is? We have this misunderstanding that if I don't put something on YouTube, baby's going to cry, he's going to play up. But it's not. I actually had that misunderstanding maybe a year ago when I used to constantly put on YouTube for him because he would enjoy it, he would dance to it. But then what I started doing is I switch it off. And then you realize they get on with things. They find
Yeah,
something to play with.
they do.
They occupy themselves. So we need to break out of that feel that, oh, unless as soon as I put him in the car, unless I switch on his iPad, And recently
Everything
what
is
I've
good
done,
in moderation. So of course, yeah, devices can be good and they can be educational, but
of
in
course, yeah.
moderation. But even playing with toys and things, it should be done in moderation. So when we were talking about how we had time limits on everything, and how we had to share and learn how to share between our siblings. Now in every household, like if you've got 3 children, each child has their own iPad or device. Whereas when we were growing up, you got that one game and you got an hour or two to play on that, and you only get two
Mm.
controls. Even if there's 6 of you, you get two controls. You learn to take it in turns. And once that time is over, that time is over. There's no more. That
Well,
is
let
it.
me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question then, right? And our listeners, right? You're talking about children sharing things. Yeah, each child has got his own device. Well, why can't the adults do that?
What, share the device?
Yeah, we're telling the kids share that device amongst yourself. You don't all need an iPad, etc. What example are we showing? You go to a family dinner and there's 10 people there, all looking
On
at
the
their mobile
device.
phone at the same time. Yeah,
Yes.
you know,
And they're communicating through WhatsApp, in the same
uh,
household
uh,
or on the same table.
exa- look. What is really surprising is that even husband and wife are unwilling to share a device. Yeah.
No, no, they won't. They won't. Not in this day and age. They won't. I don't think that sharing has become such a big thing. I do think, like,
So
when you
how
got
do we expect? How do we expect the kids to do that then?
no, and that's what I'm saying. We don't have that expectation, because back in the day the expectation was there, but now that expectation isn't there, because it's just so much more peaceful just to give each one their own devices. That one likes this, that one likes that. That one's age group is a bit different to the other
Hmm.
one, and that's how we've just learned to cope in the busy lives that we live. But even when I look back on times, like we were playing board games, and if there was
Oh
only
yeah,
four
yeah, yeah.
players, we would buddy up so that we could still play. Like there'd be two players in one corner.
Well, maybe I come from a different era than you. We made our games.
Oh
Right?
God.
Before we even had board games. I remember. Look, I remember putting a post up on social media 8 years ago when I opened my TV channel. I put a post up that the first television that I thought I owned was going back 40 odd years ago, where I got a cereal box and I
Oh
cut a
no.
bit out on that. I drew certain pictures, and then you put a roller on each end, and you scroll it, and that was my first television that I made. Yeah, we
Wow.
because the reason why I'm sharing that is because if you give a child some very basic things, their
would
mind
find a
begins
way.
to create things, and they will
Yeah, they
make them. If
find
you
a way
don't,
to invent things, create
yeah,
things, and entertain themselves, you know?
exactly. So we made a lot of our toys. Yeah,
Mm.
it's just
Oh my God, that's
uh,
so sad.
it's sad, but it also meant that we were able to explore that creative mind. Yeah,
You know, when I
I'll give
went
you
to
one
Bangladesh,
example.
yeah.
When I was a child, I had this xylophone. It
Okay.
wasn't even one of these ones with a kind of lollipop that you kind of. Anyway, it was a xylophone. But with that xylophone, I I was trying to create music, right? Because that's all I had at that time, and a tape recorder. And unfortunately, those tapes have been lost. But there is probably recordings from 40, 45 years ago where I'm singing "Old MacDonald's Had a Farm" using xylophone and having recorded it onto a tape cassette
Mm-hmm.
40 odd years ago. So
Mm,
we managed,
mm,
Um,
we did.
so
I
I
mean,
think you're right. There's advantages to it, there's disadvantages to it. But as parents, what we need to do, we need to strike that balance. I don't even know whether we stayed on topic because it was about fatherhood. But I think our conversation has been. Uh, you can't really separate fatherhood from motherhood anymore. Yeah,
no, because the
I think
roles
that's
and
the ultimate
responsibilities have
conclusion.
have developed and evolved so much now. Where mum could be at work and dad is staying at home, or it could be that dad works from home, or 50-50, whichever way. But th- the importance in this is like, yes, the dynamics has changed, but we need to let our children know that although the dynamics have changed, what we do should also it should influence what they come out to do. So just because you're in the kitchen and cooking, it doesn't mean yes, it's only a man's job now, or yes, it's only a woman's job. It is that everything is pretty much shared in this day and age, be it
Yeah,
parental responsibilities, be it cooking, cleaning, playing, whatever it might be. Uh, it's not how it used to be, and we can't hold on to those traditional um ideologies as such, because where they are in this day and age, and I have seen that myself, where they're holding on to those olden times, the way, oh, our parents used to do this, why can't we do it? It does not work. And you find that your children are retaliating, and they're coming away from you. And I've seen it with my own eyes, where the children are sitting in their own rooms because they can't communicate with their parents, because the parents are saying, no, we're doing what we used to do back in the 1980s. And the children are saying, hold on, but we're in 2023. How are we going to be functioning like this? Oh, you can't have a phone. Or even if you do have a phone, it can't be a smartphone. You can only use it to call
yeah,
us. And that doesn't work, because those children going to school, they're getting bullied for it. So
yeah.
they do start resenting you. And we just have to work with the time and what we have, I think.
I think the most important thing that I've learned in the last 2 years, now with two children, is that there is no longer a defined role for a mother and a defined role for a father.
Absolutely,
Okay,
that's true.
when we were growing up, uh, the person that we saw 90% of the time in the kitchen cooking was my mom. 10%
Hmm.
of the time, my father.
Hmm.
But my son is seeing us equally doing the cooking.
Hmm.
50% of the time I'm in the kitchen, 50% of the time his mum's in the kitchen. So I think that bit, that's the learning point. So I want my son to grow up thinking cooking's not for women,
Yes.
cooking's not for mums. My
Yeah.
dad cooks, my mum cooks.
Yeah.
Uh, my dad changes my nappy, mum changes my nappy. My
Mhm.
dad gives me a bath, mum gives me a bath. So I think for people with young children now is to completely change that mindset and start to
Mm.
think, okay, the children should not understand that the mother has specific things that she does and the father has
Mm.
specific things he does.
Things he
Mummy
does.
does the nappy, mummy does the cooking, daddy gives me cuddles and he plays with me occasionally. That shouldn't be the case.
No.
I think it's got to be equal in that sense. And that, I think, is the biggest game changer when it comes to bringing up a balanced child.
Mm.
And also to bring up a child that is far from misogyny. Yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Because a lot of these ideas are quite misogynistic if you think
Yes.
about it.
Yeah.
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 And so, how do you create? Do you bring up a child far from that? Idea of misogyny is that you show them that this is what it should be. And I think
Mm.
alhamdulillah, so far, we've managed quite well. And I want to continue that. It's a bit difficult when we're both working and stuff, but still, hopefully both my sons will grow up ready to cook for their wives, number one.
Yes. Yeah.
And ready to fulfill their role when they become fathers, equal to the mother of their
Fathers, or even when they become husbands, like if we look at roles and
Absolutely.
responsibilities from an Islamic point of view, our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would, help his wife. He would, take
He cooked, he
cook,
cleaned, and he
clean.
took out the trash. This is a hadith, by the way. We're not just
Yeah.
saying it. He cooked, he cleaned, he took out the rubbish. He did all those things. He wasn't the kind of person that would sit back and wait for the food to
Yeah.
be presented in front of him. He did everything himself. So this is the best example that we can follow. And we need to move away from that. I mean, the most, I consider the most kind of misogynistic question to ask when somebody goes to see a girl for marriage is when they ask, "Can you cook?" How
The
can you?
classic one.
Well, I'd like to see that question answered like this. Well, yes, I can. Can you cook?
Yeah.
Say it
Yeah.
back to the guy, because what kind of question is that in today's time?
Yeah. Can you cook?
So
Okay.
I still get that though. You know what? I put up a lot of my cooking stuff on social media, and I still get a lot of people saying, "Oh my God, you can cook!" And I'm thinking, isn't that normal?
Yeah.
Isn't that,
Some people find
isn't
it
that the
really
way it should be?
therapeutic, to cook. Is obviously cooking is an
I
art,
find
and
it.
they find it
I find it
therapeutic.
the most relaxing thing that you could do,
Yeah, and it's
and the
just so
safest thing if you
satisfying.
don't want to get food poisoning. Yeah?
It's satisfying to see your family eat that food and be happy, and
Absolutely.
obviously I'm sure you get compliments for your food as well, and that's
Do
just
you know what my biggest high of the last 3 weeks? Obviously, my son being born,
yeah.
Dean was born, but my biggest high after that was we did the akika, and
Uh-huh.
then I said to my mum, I'm going to cook. Yeah.
Oh wow.
So I cooked the akika meat for my mum
Yeah.
and the guests, and for me that was like, alhamdulillah, I was able to do that. Yeah. So look at what all the guys are missing out on if you don't know how to.
If you don't know, did you put on like your Deshi style, like the gamsa and the vest and the
No.
longi? Dig a hole out in the ground and have a big.
I have a specific uniform when I'm cooking. The
Okay.
pictures are on social media. There we go.
All right, nice one. So we have slowly come to the end of our show. It's always, it goes so fast every single time. But thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully there'll be something that someone takes away from this, even if it is that one person. At least we know we've helped someone somewhere. So thank you for coming on, and I hope to see you back here soon.
It's always a pleasure to be on your program. And look, I need to give you some feedback. I've been following this program since you started, and it's come a long distance. So,
thank you.
It's you're covering some very important topics, and more to come, hopefully. So I look forward to joining you again at some point in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, dear viewers, thank you so much for being with us. And until next week, and on Our Voice with Amina, where there's no stigma, no shame. I'll see you again soon. Thank you.
সকাল দুপুর সন্ধ্যা রাতে তোমার আমার কথা হবে রিল্যাক্স রেডিও বাংলায় রিল্যাক্স রেডিও বাংলা
Relax Radio